Good Friday afternoon, everyone. Everyone, Florida Native Plant Society members. Thank you for joining our Lunch and Learn with Erin Largo-Wight, professor at the University of North Florida, who's here with her adorable dog.
Joseph.
Hi, Joseph. We really appreciate all of your memberships, and your membership directly supports these Lunch and Learns and all of our staff activity in pursuit of our mission to conserve, preserve, and restore the native plants and native plant communities of Florida. Just a quick update about what we've been doing. Juliet and I have been doing quite a lot of field work lately. Most recently, we've begun monitoring 2 endemic and endangered scrub balms in the genus Dicerandra. We have 4 volunteer days next week if you happen to be within driving distance of either Davenport in Polk County or Ocala in Marion County. You can find those on our calendar or on our Facebook events. So here I have just put that link, our Facebook events link in the chat. Also on the back end, you might notice we've just transitioned our website over to the upgrade that we've been working on for several years. Thank you, Shirley Denton and Paul Redman, for their amazing tech skills and making this process go as smoothly as possible, which is not always completely smoothly. So you'll notice that we have some broken links, and you can report those and any suggestions, feedback, or report a problem. You can email me, communications@fnps.org, or if you post it in the members-only Facebook group, I also look at that. The website upgrade has also affected our email delivery and has resulted in our emails more frequently ending up in our member spam folders, even if they didn't previously end up in your spam folder. So we'd appreciate any efforts that you make to mark our emails as safe or important, or if you're a Gmail user, you can help us by moving them to your updates or inbox folders. We had a great discussion last week about historical spatial data, like aerial imagery. And so there seemed to be a lot of interest in historical ecology. So I scheduled the DIY Historical Ecology Lunch and Learn for next month, October 9th. And I'll be leading that. It'll be pretty workshop-y, even though it'll still be YouTube Live. So please be prepared to download things to your computer and work with aerial imagery. So I'll be sending out instructions for that pretty soon, so you can be prepared. And next week's Lunch and Learn is Climate Change Communication with educator and nature guide Karen Willey. And the week after that is the Natural History of Lake Blue Scrub with Tom Palmer, Lakeland's Ledger's environmental reporter. And without further ado, here is Karen. Here's Erin's. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I'm Erin Largo-Wight. As said, I'm at the University of North Florida. I've been there since 2007. Received my undergraduate degree. I know this is all Floridian, so I'll tell you, University of South Florida. My master's at University of Delaware, and then my PhD at University of Florida. I'm from the Nature Coast. I'm from Inverness, Florida, Crystal River, Citrus County area. So I have been interested in nature contact in the built environment since I was a child. And I'm really honored to be here to be able to share a little bit about my research and about this field. So what I'm going to do today is just talk a little bit about health by design. So as I said, I'm a professor in the Department of Public Health. So a lot of where I'm coming from with this is from the public health perspective. So thinking about people and thinking about how people benefit. So I'm going to talk about health by design, science and theory of nature contact, and some application. This may be known to you, but we're just going to go over some tips for health related to the outdoor and your indoor environments. So first, nature contact research is hot. It is very hot right now. In the last year, maybe 2. I can tell you this because I've been studying this area seriously starting back in graduate school in the early 2000s, and it didn't receive as much attention. It was a little harder for me to kind of get everyone to say, this is important, our environments are important, and where we spend our time impacts us and our health. Now it seems to be that culturally, socially, we sort of understand that. So there's lots of interest. I've had the opportunity to speak to lots of different news media outlets over the last year, 2 years, about some of the research that I'm going to share with you today. There's lots of publications. So part of the reason why I think it's hot is maybe it is a little trendy. People are interested in how to make their environments healthier for themselves and for their families. But there's also a growing body of research to support this. So here's some of the work that we've done at the University of North Florida. It's a jumbled mess, not anything you can digest here, but there's a link at the bottom that I'm happy to share in comments or whatever, where you can access some more information, and you can always contact me if you'd like to discuss anything further. I am going to explore several of these studies in this talk, so we'll be able to learn about that a little bit more. So health by design. The idea here is, from a public health perspective, making health easier for people. So in public health, it's an interdisciplinary field. We have people from biology to communication all over the place that are interested in public health and working in public health. But really, the two primary core areas that are focused in this area, really environmental health, which makes sense. Those health professionals that are interested in exposures and environments, and health promotion, which is really applied social and behavioral science that's really striving to find solutions for people. So it's kind of a marriage of these two areas. So it's applied social and behavioral sciences to promote healthy exposures and healthy environments for people. So there's a really interesting TED Talk that I encourage anyone who's interested to check it out. It's called Healthy Human Habitat. And basically, it's Dr. Howard Frumkin, who is somebody who's explored this area for many, many years. And what he does is, in his TED Talk, he talks about building a zoo. And he says, when we build a zoo, we think about the habitat that is needed for the animals. What do they need? How much space do they need? How much social interaction do they need? What is the best for conducive for their thriving? And the idea with health by design is we think about that from a human perspective. What do we need as humans to thrive? And here it is. So this is basically a summary of what a healthy community is based on the research and what healthy indoor spaces are. You can see what I have highlighted at the bottom, nature, contact, and biophilic design, because that's what I'm going to be focusing on for the rest of this talk. But I wanted to put it in context with the broader area of health by design. So healthy communities, they're mixed land use and they're dense, so people can get around easily. There's high connectivity. It's a safe place. People have access to healthy choices. It's a sustainable place from an environmental sustainability standpoint. In addition, there's access to nature contact, and I have in there everyday outdoors. So it doesn't have to be a special thing. It can just be access to the outdoors and greenery. Healthy indoor space are free of environmental stressors, which we know are the big ones: crowding, clutter, noise, and pollutants, indoor pollutants. And they also offer that positive, healthy aspect, that biophilic design, bringing the outdoors in. And I'll talk about that nature contact and biophilic design. So what we're going to do is just kind of go through a visual literature review. And this is by no means comprehensive. I'm just kind of highlighting some of the early studies in the field visually. And then I will talk to you after I kind of get through some of the big categorical literature that's been published. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the work that we're doing. So first, windows. There was a study in 1981, and it was by accident, in a prison. And what they found was that prisoners who were randomly assigned to cells that had a view of rolling, it wasn't this picture actually, but it was rolling farmland. So they were able to see green, they had a view. They had significantly less sick visits than those prisoners who had an internal view. So no other differences. Over an 11-year period, they found this trend. So that became interesting, and researchers were wondering what's going on. So architecture research and others were wondering, was that a fluke, or let's look into this. So it was replicated many times, but one of the most cited was this one in 1984, which looked back retrospectively at patients in a hospital, and it was the same kind of thing, randomized into this room versus this room. One had a view, one had natural light but no view, and you saw similar trends. So then the interest became, is it a view? Is it natural light? Turns out it's both, because when you isolate and just look at natural light, it also has been shown to be health promoting. So this is another hospital example. Urban vegetation. These studies are so interesting to me. Greener areas surrounding inner city housing projects have less crime reported, and this is replicated over and over and over again. And the only isolating factor they're looking at is greener areas. Indoor plants. So plants have been studied in an indoor space in well-controlled ways. And this is an example of an experimental design where you had a high plant condition, really high plant, 22 plants in 130 square feet, reported greater outcomes than those with no plants. So this was a well-controlled experimental design. So they were doing some kind of cognitive task in two different spaces. Fish tanks. For some reason, fish tanks are always studied in dental offices. So dental patients who viewed fish tanks swimming in an aquarium had significant lower anxiety and discomfort and increased patient compliance than their counterparts. So maybe there's something to those fish tanks that we often see. Dogs, pets, animal-assisted therapy. This is a huge area of research, and it kind of is in the health by design, but animals aren't design features, so it's kind of tricky, but I include it in here because it is a powerful example of maybe the biophiliac hypothesis, which we're going to talk about today. Pet owners, especially dog owners, have dramatic, significantly higher survival rate following a heart attack after controlling for confounders such as socioeconomic status, diet, exercise, etc. So what that controlling means is that if you have two people and they're doing the same exact lifestyle, they're eating the same thing, they have everything the same, they're going for the same walk, the ones with the dogs are having better health outcomes than those without. So it's another interesting kind of biological health. Nature, sounds, and images. So what about representations? Representations of sounds and images. This was an interesting study that it was a randomized control trial that showed that nature therapy, so people who went in for a procedure and had exposure to a scene of nature and recorded sounds of nature, did significantly better than those in the traditional group. So it's kind of interesting. It's pretty low effort. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about some of our studies. So where you see the sun and it says our work, that's all stuff that we've done at either at the University of Florida or University of North Florida. So getting into this research, being exposed to this and thinking, wow, from a public health perspective, this is really awesome because it's relatively easy for people to have more nature contact and to think about that as a way to meaningfully impact their health. So it doesn't require a tremendous amount of effort and commitment and sweat and all of that. It can be something that we can gain passively. So I was really interested in this as a practical application to promote health. So my first question in looking at all the literature that was done was, what about forms and doses of nature contact indoors? What works and how much do you need? So those were some questions that I had. So the first step to explore that was develop a way to measure nature contact so that we could have some way to explore it. So this tool is called the Nature Contact Questionnaire. It's published in 2011. The citation is at the bottom and it's available, free. It's in the publication. It's a 16-item survey that basically represents all the different forms of indoor nature contact based on the literature prior to this publication. And what we did in this study was develop this based on the literature and then test it, and it's valid, reliable, and it's published, and it's available freely for anybody who wants to use it. Since it was published in 2011, it has been used quite a few times in other subsequent research, as we'd hope it would. And it's also been modified to different environments. So we created this for a work environment, but it's been modified, I believe, for school environments and healthcare environments. So people that are interested in this area of research are free to use it and modify it. So with that tool, we were interested to find out, well, what works, what doesn't. So we conducted a very large study of desk-bound office workers. We had 503 people participate. And what they did was they completed a series of surveys on their health, on their stress, on their health complaints and behaviors. And then they also completed the nature contact questionnaire. And it was really important that we included only desk-bound office staff in this study because we wanted their environment to be stable. So their work environment where they can use that checklist and go through and really measure what they were exposed to. If it was somebody moving around all the time, it'd be very hard to measure their environment. So we wanted those people where we knew we could kind of get them where they are. What we found was there was a significant negative association between nature contact in their office space, so for those 7 to 8 hours, and their general stress and general health complaints. So as nature contact in the office went up, their health complaints and general health problems and stress went down. So I was really interested in that because it wasn't just work stress. It was generalized, holistic life stress and health complaints related to an office environment. So that was pretty interesting. That was also published in 2011, and the citation is here. And another interesting thing that we found with that study was, again, kind of comparing and seeing, well, what matters most? What works and what doesn't, and how much do you need? Because that's what I really was trying to get at. So we looked at what's called the Nature Contact Questionnaire subscales, and there are 3 subscales: direct, indoor, and abstract. And what we found was the more direct the nature contact was, the bigger the impact on their health, the strongest the association with their health. So the more frequently the desk-bound office staff got outside, had an outdoor task or an outdoor work break, that was the strongest predictor. So having access to the outdoors is an important thing, even throughout your day, your work day, taking breaks, etc. The next most important thing was the indoor nature contact. So it was the percentage of time that they had a view outdoors, unobstructed view from a window outdoors, the percentage of time that they had natural light in their office space, the amount of plants they had, and if they had access to fish/animals. That's a little asterisk because it was a very small sample that actually had that, but it was significant, so I included it. The third thing was showing trending towards health, but it wasn't statistically significant. So we also measured something called abstract nature contact, which is things like art, photography, artificial plants, and sounds, recorded sounds of nature. And we saw that it was related, but it wasn't statistically significant. So that's the third priority, so to speak, according to this study. So next, I became interested in nature sounds. So what about a brief exposures to nature sound? Really brief. Can we do something small that maybe possibly makes an impact? So what we did was we had participants in an office or waiting room like space randomized into one of 3 groups where they listened to stuff. They either listened to silence, nature sounds, or classical music for 15 minutes. There were no differences among the groups at the beginning, so everybody was the same in all areas. But after listening for that little tiny period of time, the nature sound group experienced statistically significant decrease in muscle tension. We were measuring with those electrodes on their forehead, pulse rate, and self-reported stress. There were no differences in the other groups. So they didn't change, they didn't go up, they didn't go down, they just stayed the same. The really interesting thing to me about this study was that the change happened as early as 7 minutes. So just taking a short little micro break and having even a little taste of our biology of nature contact can be a good thing. So that led to both of those sort of led to this study, which is nature at work, outdoor work breaks. Do brief outdoor nature experiences work in the real world? So we knew from that first study it seemed to be important when we did the survey, but we were wondering if we actually had people do it, would it matter? So what we did was we had, again, desk-bound office staff participate in the 6-week study, and they either took an indoor work break every morning for 10 minutes for 6 weeks, or they took an outdoor work break every morning for 10 minutes for 6 weeks. If they were in the outdoor work break group, they were in our treatment group. That's what we were interested in. And they followed this protocol here on your screen. They took at least 10-minute work break every day. During their break, they were just supposed to focus on their environment. So focus your attention on the natural elements that surround you, such as the clouds, sky, temperature, sounds, birds, squirrels, trees, grass, vegetation, water, fountain, etc. Do not do anything else. Please don't talk on your phone, text, please don't walk, please don't exercise. It's a passive thing. We just want to see if being in this space matters. And what we found was in the 2 groups, there were no differences again. So we made sure the groups were equal at the start. Both of the groups had a significant reduction in stress as a result of the 6-week study. So that tells us taking a break is important, period, no matter where you take it. But those that were in the outdoor group had a statistically significant greater reduction in their stress and health complaints than those in the indoor. So you can see the little graphs there, the pre and the post and the treatment and the control. So it was pretty notable. And this was published in 2017. So kids are a huge issue in the nature contact world. There is increasingly children are spending less time outdoors than ever before. We know from research in the US that children spend on average 40 minutes outside per day, and that's on the weekend when they have free time. On the weekday, most of the time they spend outdoors is what they do at school. So we know that being outdoors and being connected to nature is important for child development. We know that school is an important place for them to get that. So we were really interested in seeing what we can do at school that will work for a school, but will also maybe help the kids get more exposure. So what we wanted to see was, do brief outdoor nature experiences promote healthy outcomes at school among children? So can they learn outside? Yes, they have recess, which is important and vital for so many reasons, but can we bring them outside for other times too, and maybe increase that time that they get to have nature contact? So what we did was we had a 6-week study, and we measured children every single day for 6 weeks in their school, and we measured their learning, behavior, and health in 2 different classrooms. It was an experimental crossover design, which means that there were 2 classes, 2 teachers, all doing language arts. On Monday, teacher A in class A was inside, and you can see the picture. And on Tuesday, she went outside, and they switched. So it was great because each student was their own control. So you could see the same kid in both conditions over and over again. And they were teaching their regular lesson, language arts. They were doing writing and reading and all different kinds of stuff related to that. It was just in different places. So what we found was that we were measuring 3 primary things: teacher redirections, students on task, and then child well-being. And what we found was that the teachers redirected. They kind of yelled at the kids or had to redirect their behavior significantly less outdoors than they did indoors. We also measured children on task. We had these earbuds in, and we had research assistants there watching them, and that would ding every 15 seconds. And at the same time, they would count the number of children that were not doing what they were supposed to be doing off task and just tally them. And what we found was fewer children were off task when they were outside doing their language arts than when they were inside. We also have some evidence that teachers reported higher perceived child well-being in the outdoor environment. I have an asterisk there because we really want to do a follow-up study and do a better measure of child well-being than reported teacher perception of it. But we saw it was a really interesting study, and it's especially interesting now with COVID, as it being an opportunity for kids to learn safely outdoors for other reasons, not just for nature. So really interested in that. We also had a study where we were looking at nature in the home, and also interested in, do cut flowers act like nature contact? So we had a sample of 170 women in Jacksonville that participated in the study. And what it was 12 consecutive days. They had in-depth stress and health surveys over the 12 days. The women were randomized, unknown to them, so it was blind, into one of 3 conditions in the middle of those 12 days study. They were randomized either into a flower delivery, a comparison delivery, which was a luxury candle delivered to the home, or no delivery. And we wanted to see if just having that in the home made a difference. And what we found was there was no difference in the groups at baseline again. And the flower group had a significant reduction in stress after the delivery. So their reported of their daily reporting stress surveys showed a marked decrease, significantly reduced decrease in stress as a result of the delivery. And it was interesting because a lot of people said, well, just having a special gift and having a delivery and that's all that really matters. And we said, no, actually having the natural element in your home is what we found matters. So next steps for our research, just as an FYI, we're interested in nature prescription, basically physicians and their knowledge in this area and how we can help them support their patients. COVID and nature, we did a Florida statewide survey looking at how people were reacting during the quarantine in March and April, and if they were getting outside more or less. And we're trying to figure out the impact on their stress and health with that. It was kind of hard because of COVID being in there too, and so many uncertainties, but we have some data that we're working through now with that. We're doing behavioral studies looking at how nature contact behavior and other behaviors impact health. And then again, I mentioned I really am interested in follow up with the outdoor classroom. So why? I want to talk just briefly here about why this is. Why do we feel better? Why do we see these better health outcomes? The why really comes to 2 things. From a big picture, biology. So the why is really our biology. So biophilia hypothesis, I'm sure some of you have heard of that and read E.O. Wilson, basically states that nature contact and being outdoors is an effective intervention for us today because of our linkage to survival in the past. So throughout human existence, our human biology has been embedded in the outdoors and in nature. So it is natural for us today to still feel that linkage because we're not so different. So our outdoor outdoor or outdoor-like environments are biologically familiar to us. So there's some sense of restoration and well-being and health associated with that. So from a psychological standpoint, we really explore a little bit deeper and try to figure out, well, what is going on. The mechanism basically comes down to stress. So we know that stress is related to physiological health outcomes. So with high levels of stress and high level of reactivity in your body, you're going to have high level of physiological reaction, which has implications for all sorts of physical health issues and chronic health issues. So we really think it's a stress mechanism. We're trying to figure out, well, really what's going on with stress? How is this working? And there's two possible but closely related mechanisms here. And one is basically saying that nature contact enhances health and learning through a process of restoration of fatigued cognitive resources to help us better cope. So it basically states that we have these cognitive resources like problem solving, attention, communication. We have these resources, but they become fatigued with overuse. So stepping outside and getting that fresh of breath air that we all sort of realize and feel ourselves, that's something that can help restore those things as they become fatigued. The other mechanism, which is related but slightly different, basically says stimulation of underutilized areas help to balance concentration of the stimulation and enhanced sensory perception. So basically, what that's suggesting is that if you're constantly working on coping and your attention and your this, and it's basically a fatigue mechanism in a different way, that nature maybe stimulates a different part. It's an awe. It's an art. So they're very close, and it basically have to do with restoration, stress and coping, health, and then the fatigue of resources. And the idea is that nature kind of helps restore that process. So very interesting. So application. Basically, when we talk in public health and we think about application here, we think about applying healthy community principles. So applying all of this, including what we're talking about with nature contact. I'm going to talk just briefly here of specifics in both outdoors and indoor settings. So this is a nice summary that I published in 2011, which basically is a summary of the literature up to that point. And since then, there has been more, but it has basically been complementary to this. And it basically says there are 11 things that we can do as people or as public health professionals to promote nature contact for the health of the public. And the first is sort of the highest priority based on the past research, all the way down to maybe the lowest priority. Yes, there's some research to suggest that it's helpful, but if we're really focusing our attention, we're focusing in those top ones that we know are most critical. So advocating preserving wilderness, incorporating wooding parks and green spaces in community and community design, maintaining gardens at settings, so having access for people to be able to interact with nature in different settings, and cultivate the grounds for viewing. So those are sort of our big ones that we've seen, really important. And then bringing in the nature inside. So the potted plants, the bright natural view, the clear view outdoors, etc. The allow air and sounds in is something that has not been well studied. There's some hints to that. But things like opening your window and being able to have more access, it makes sense, but there's not as much hard data there. I had a little bit to support that. But I encourage anyone who's interested, it's kind of a review and summarizes lots of the work that has been done. So some takeaways for outdoor nature contact. The outdoor space alone is health promoting. So passive exposure, just being there, having your phone call there rather than inside or whatever you're doing, is a healthy exposure. So it's independent of active, independent of challenge, and independent of adventure. There is a lot of literature on wilderness therapy and adventure kind of seeking stuff, which there are benefits there. But what we're talking about here is just the stress reduction, health benefit, and its passive exposure, just being there. So some tips for us to consider as we're doing this. And this is especially important for people who are maybe teachers out of school or employers who are thinking about opportunities for their employees or whatever, is to think about cultivating situations. That tip number one, that are comfortable. So you want to make sure we're in Florida. We have to think about comfort. We are used to the heat. We're used to the sun. So there's that. But having shade, considering the temperature, considering weather conditions. Ironically, one of the really important weather conditions that posed problems for us in our outdoor classroom study was wind. So if it's really excessively windy or something, it may not be the best opportunity. And reduced threats. And that is just to say reduced discomforts. So if there are biting insects or things like that that are going to cause, for example, an outdoor classroom to have a problem concentrating, you want to make sure you're positioning yourself to where that's less likely. Tip number two is feasibility. So having the experience be feasible, habit forming and part of one's day. So where there's minimal setup, minimal preparation, a lot of times we seek these amazing experiences, but having the experience just as you step outside your door may be just as powerful and way more feasible. Tip number three, as you're doing this, regardless of what you're doing, involves stakeholders. This is especially true, as I was saying, if you're in a school setting and you're trying to create something like this, involve administration, parents, teachers, etc. So get other people on board if you're trying to incorporate more of this. So healthy indoor takeaways. Healthy indoor spaces are free of environmental stressors. So those things we don't want. And they also have biophilic design. So that's whether you're in a classroom, your home, your workplace, a healthcare setting, you're bringing the outdoors in and you're reducing those other things in order to make a restorative indoor space. So tips related to nature contact specifically would be in your indoor space, have an opportunity, based on the research, have an opportunity for outdoor access. Take breaks, eat outdoors, recreate, and have an infrastructure set up for you that makes that possible and easy. So whether it's a picnic table or shade or some aspect for you to make that possible. Tip number two is bring the direct nature indoors. So open your blinds, remove things from in front of the windows. If you're a teacher, take the paper down from the windows so you can see outside. Have a clear, unblocked view. Position yourself or whoever near a window to allow for a view and for of natural light to come in. Of plants, flowers in your indoor space. Green it up, bring the outdoors in as much as you can. And fish tank, animals, etc. Tip number three, possibly, we know the research is not as strong here, but bring indirect inside too, possibly. So representations, things like photography may be helpful. This is just a slide for if we have any UNF students here. A lot of times I share UNF, the Environmental Center. If you're interested in this area, start with the UNF Environmental Center. We have lots of programs and access to help connect you and help support you as you grow professionally and personally related to environmental studies. Read research and books. A lot of these books really summarize a lot of the research out there and are really helpful, and get outdoors yourself. So with that, I welcome any questions that you may have, and I think I'll doing it this way. Thanks. Yes, I know when I was supposed to speak, so I'm glad to have the opportunity today. Mhm. In the study that we did, it was only 2 teachers, so it was very hard, but we did give them surveys and we interviewed them, and we found that, yes, it seemed to impact them. There were some issues related to feasibility. So if you're adding stress to a teacher's day where it's harder for them to get outside and it becomes a chore, then that can almost be counterproductive. So that was one of the things where we really said it has to be feasible. You have to set it up so it's doable and not too hard. But yes, you would think that absolutely that this would have a positive impact on the teachers as much. One of the questions we had was the teachers were redirecting less outdoors than indoors. Was that the students or the teachers? So we assume it was the students, but maybe they were more tolerant. We don't really know. So we didn't tease that out. So it's something definitely that we're interested in pursuing, is looking at the impact on the teachers as well.
Great. Yes. Sorry you guys couldn't hear me. I didn't have my microphone on for y'all. But Erin could hear me. So.
I could hear you.
She answered Jeanette Hartzell's question. It was great for teacher stress. And so, we followed up with if Erin had done any work on teacher stress. So that's the question she answered. Linda Eastman said, being outdoors in the summer heat is very difficult for some people, me. I find myself looking out my windows a lot more during COVID isolation, and that she finds it noticeably helpful.
Yes, getting outdoors. So this is a question that comes a lot of times when I present this work at national conferences. There's always people in the Midwest that say, for example, well, we can't have an outdoor classroom because we have 6 months of the year where it's snow on the ground and we just cannot do that. It's not comfortable. So it is important that the space is comfortable. And if we're indoors and we're looking outside, that's the next best thing that we can do. The other thing related to that kind of snow element is you can't do it all year. So regardless of if you're down here in the heat or if you're up in the Midwest with the snow, it's not going to be something that's year round. It's sort of like playgrounds at schools. So Midwest schools have playgrounds and they don't necessarily use them all year, but they have the infrastructure there and available so their students can benefit when it becomes conducive. So it's the same kind of thing, I think, where we could have the infrastructure, have it available, but it's not necessarily something you have to commit to every single day if it's not a comfortable situation.
Deborah Curry, who is the president of our Marion Big Scrub chapter, says, marvelous presentation.
Thank you.
She didn't know that actual research had been done on this. And she asked if she could get hard data for teachers, which, you did cover some. They can go to your website, which I linked before in the chat, so I'll drop it. That's largowight.domains.unf.edu.
Yes, and there's something I need to post on there too. I did do a recorded lecture for teachers specifically on how they could consider their classroom. It was sort of like this, but it was a little bit more specific. This was more general because I wasn't sure what, some people maybe are thinking about their homes or their workplace or whatever. So I did do a presentation that was targeted just to teachers and went through in detail the study that we did, which we did a feasibility piece to that. We also did an efficacy, so how effective the outdoor classroom was. So I can make sure that that's on my website too, so that if anyone wanted to see that, and as well as the actual publications, the print, the PDF documents. The only other thing I was going to say about the classrooms is, yes, there's been a lot of interest in this, in the classroom aspect, especially because of COVID. So I've been receiving emails from teachers, just teachers in Duval County or around Florida saying, how can I do this? I happened to Google it and your name came up. So about research is, there is research on nature contact, but it's somewhat limited. So you can kind of piece together stuff from the 80s, but it was sort of accidental. They stumbled upon it, and but putting it together in this neat nature contact or health by design portfolio is relatively new. And there's not a tremendous number of labs in the US that are studying the impacts of nature contact. In Germany and in Europe, there's a lot more going on, and I get a lot of contacts coming from Europe. But in the United States, we have been doing stuff. We've been stumbling upon it, but it hasn't been as deliberate as what we see in Europe. So hopefully we're getting there. So it's exciting. Yes.
And there was a question from Kenneth if this presentation was going to be available recorded. So that's the great thing about YouTube Live, is that it's actually what you might consider DVR'd. So you can actually rewind right now and go back to when I didn't have my microphone on. Or back to the middle of the presentation, whatever you prefer. And then the presentation will be available in the future to all members at the same link that you have right now. So, and that goes for our past Lunch and Learns and our future Lunch and Learns as well. You can access past Lunch and Learns. The links are in the Sable Minor, both the most recent volume, Volume 5, and then Volume 4. And I am adding past ones that I did prior to YouTube Live. I just have to edit and post them. So, keep an eye on our weekly emails, and, a fresh one might pop up. Randy Snyder, Mary Time, who are in Central Florida, very awesome people, asks, do you measure stress other than self-reporting levels, which you did do some?
Mm-hmm. So mostly I use valid and reliable instruments, which are self-reported, but I have published a few studies, I think 2, where we did psychophysiological measures of stress, which are thought to be physiological reactions that are associated with stress. So it's sort of the stress happens mentally, it's a perception that happens, and then there's a cascade of physiological responses. So we measured EMG, which is electrical muscle tension, which is thought to be a result of stress. We measured pulse rate, and those were the only 2. I really want to get into cortisol testing, which is a hormone related to stress. So there's some other things. It's not as stable, and it's not the effects. This is kind of getting in the weeds, but the effect size of nature contact impacting stress is statistically significant in all of the studies that I shared with you. But the effect may be small, so it may not be like a humongous effect size. So with some of the measures, they're less sensitive, so it's harder to measure correctly. So really the issue in nature contact and in stress, both issues, is measurement. What is an effective measurement? So that's really what, in the United States, what we're working on in this area of research is how to best measure this. We need tools and we need methods so that we can describe what we sort of intuitively understand and can see from past research is happening, but we just have to find a way to show that, to demonstrate it quantitatively.
So is there just not a lot of research on like cortisol levels in different situations? And
no, there is. There's a lot of research on cortisol levels, and it's basically cortisol is not very reactive, so it doesn't change tremendously. It's sort of a stable measure, and it's almost like you'd have to have a really long intervention over a long period of time to be able to track changes in that, because you're not going to see like, okay, you go outside and then you come inside and you're seeing a marked change. You're going to have a pretty stable levels. And it's also really, really important to measure it at the same time every day. So it's sort of like each person would have their normal rhythm of their cortisol levels. So it's hard to point to an intervention and say, it was that caused the change. And it wasn't just that's what happens to you in the afternoon. So it's a little trickier to use that, but there are other physiological, you can use skin conductance, which is thought to be a measure of psychological stress related to skin reactivity, and that's a pretty sensitive measure. EMG is pretty good. So there's heart rate variability, not just heart rate, but heart rate variability, which you can use with different wearable technology. That may be something that would be a way to measure physiological measures of stress too.
Deborah Curry asks, have you watched eye changes, dilation, eye movement?
I have not, but there is research related to psychological research related to using the eyes and focus of the eyes. That requires a lot of technology that would grant funding. You can get that kind of stuff, but we do not have that right now at UNF. But I am familiar, especially with a past flower delivery publication where they used the tracking of the movements of the eyes and dilation related to the flowers, and we're able to show that interest. So it's like a sort of environmental preference research.
Like upon receipt of the flowers?
Right, yeah. As opposed to other gifts. So you always have to couch it with that. So it can't just be, because then otherwise it's like, oh, here's something special coming. It's like, no, there has to be a comparison group or a control group.
We have a text-in question from our intern, Joanna, who does not have a YouTube or Google account. She says, how much time for connecting to nature is recommended for the best health improvement?
That's an interesting, so the forms and doses is like the $1,000 question. So we've done a lot of these hit or miss kind of studies where you find one thing is related to this and you're like, well, how much do you really need? Like, where does it start and where does it end? So having those comparison studies, which have to be cross-sectional, they have to be asking a bunch of things, they have to be survey, where you basically are able to say, okay, which one has the strongest relationship to whatever outcomes we're measuring. And in that, like I said, the outdoors are the most important. So having the most direct contact and the amount of time that you need, or what is the minimum, the only thing I can point to on that is the listening study that we did and the outdoor booster break study that we did. So in both of those conditions, one was 7 minutes. We started to see a marked decrease in stress after listening to nature sounds for 7 minutes, and the whole intervention was 15. But we didn't see any increased benefit after that 7-minute mark from the physiological stress reactions that we were measuring. So that's pretty short. So having a quick little 7-minute break. The outdoor booster break study, that was a 10-minute work break daily. So could it have been 5 and they had the same benefit? We don't know, because we did 10. So that's where it's almost like you have to have a ton of different conditions and testing all of them at the same time, which requires funding for that kind of research, but it would be really interesting and helpful.
But preliminarily, well-being could be very strongly associated with having at least some green space nearby your work and nearby your home. Just
right.
Because if you can't access it, then you're not going to take that 7-minute or 10-minute break.
Right. Yeah. And the interesting thing is, we didn't measure the quality of the outdoor environments that we were assessing. This was simply people stepping outside, and where did they go? We don't know. So but it's even to say that may not matter as much as we think. If we're trying to encourage that for people. So if I was an employer or I'm a teacher and I want to encourage that behavior, I'm going to try to create infrastructure to make it comfortable and opportunities for people to go out. But even so, just the stepping out may be the most important thing. So just helping people to do that is sort of what we're thinking about now. Mm-hmm.
So that's it for questions. Linda Eastman did chime in and with a testimonial, more or less. She says, my native plantings provide so many opportunities to watch critters foraging for resources in the garden. Watching birds, butterflies, etc. really enhances her own personal feelings of well-being.
Yeah, that's great. I totally relate to on a personal level. Yeah.
Well, when we're talking about a personal level, you see you have some plants. Do you want to talk about your plants?
Oh, my plants. I don't know. Do I want to talk about my plants? I have plants in my space. I'm not sure this is a native plant. I think you told me it wasn't. I have a lot of natural light. I am positioned where I'm looking out the window. And so I have a great view. And I know for me, I think I was interested in this line of research because I am extremely sensitive to the environment that I'm in. And I think I am one of the high responders to nature contact. So it's very, very important for me and my well-being and my productivity. So I know I have to have my space configured where I have plants here, and I have the natural light and the view. And that really personally is helpful for me.
Awesome. Okay, there are no further questions. So I just wanted to thank everybody for continuing to come to our Lunch and Learns and for your support and keeping up your membership. If you want to continue to support our Lunch and Learns, if you could become a regular, your membership can be auto-renewed. That's really helpful. Or if you want to do a higher annual fee, that would be helpful. Or you can just donate to the general fund, because the general fund is what pays Juliet's and my salaries and pays for equipment, computers and stuff. So thank you guys so much. Please send me feedback if you have speakers or topics you'd like to hear. I'm trying to find topics that I feel are most interest to FNPS members, and I have taken a number of requests and suggestions and board member suggestions. So if you do have thoughts of suggestions of speakers, I am very happy to hear them. So thank you, Erin, for spending your Friday lunch with us. Really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you for having me.
And I hope that we can have you at our conference next spring, however we have it.
Great. Sounds great.
Okay. I suppose that completes our Lunch and Learn, and I hope everyone has a wonderful Friday afternoon and a great weekend.
Bye. Thank you.